British SAS, Special Air Service, masters of desert sabotage and guerrilla warfare. In the vast, unforgiving deserts of North Africa during World War II, a handful of British soldiers changed the very definition of modern warfare. The Special Air Service, or SAS, began not as a grand military division but as an audacious idea. In 1941, a young and daring Scottish officer named David Stirling proposed the creation of a small, highly mobile unit that could strike deep behind enemy lines, destroy vital supplies, and disappear before the enemy even knew what happened. At first, the idea sounded reckless. Britain was already fighting for survival, and conventional military thinking favored large-scale engagements, not small bands of raiders. But Stirling saw something others didn't, that in the vast deserts of North Africa, speed, surprise, and stealth could be far deadlier than tanks and battalions. With quiet approval from higher command, the Special Air Service was born, initially as a deception unit meant to confuse the Germans into thinking Britain had a new airborne division. What began as a ruse soon became one of the most feared and effective special forces in military history. The SAS started small, just around 60 men, many drawn from British commandos. Their first mission, however, was nearly a disaster. Parachuting into the desert during a violent sandstorm, many of their men and supplies were lost. But Stirling refused to quit. Partnering with the Long-Range Desert Group, LRDG, a group of expert desert navigators, the SAS switched tactics. They stopped parachuting and started driving directly into enemy territory, using jeeps and trucks loaded with machine guns and explosives. Their targets were German and Italian airfields scattered across Libya and Egypt. In daring nighttime raids, the SAS struck without warning, planting explosives on parked aircraft, fuel dumps, and ammunition stores. In a single night, they could destroy dozens of Axis planes, far more than many air battles achieved. Their success wasn't just in the explosions they caused, but in the chaos they created. Rommel's Afrika Korps soon found themselves constantly on edge, unsure when and where the next SAS strike might come. The SAS became the embodiment of unconventional warfare, small teams operating independently, surviving in harsh conditions, relying on courage, cunning, and camaraderie. They wore Arab headscarves instead of helmets, navigated by the stars, and carried only what they could fit in their jeeps. Their motto, "Who dares wins," wasn't just words, it was a way of life. By 1942, the SAS had become one of the most effective tools of the British war machine. They destroyed over 400 enemy aircraft, blew up supply depots, and disrupted vital transport routes across North Africa. But their impact went beyond numbers. Their raids forced the Axis to divert men and resources away from the front lines, weakening their overall strength. When the war moved from the deserts of Africa to the battlefields of Europe, the SAS evolved again. They traded their jeeps for parachutes and carried out sabotage operations behind German lines in France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Working alongside local resistance groups, they cut railway lines, ambushed convoys, and fed intelligence back to Allied command. Their work directly supported major operations like D-Day and the liberation of Europe. What made the SAS truly unique wasn't just their daring missions, it was their philosophy. They operated on trust and initiative. Every man was trained to think independently, to improvise, and to survive. In an era dominated by rigid military hierarchy, the SAS encouraged creativity and quick decision-making. Their success proved that a small, well-trained and motivated unit could achieve what entire divisions could not. By the end of World War II, the SAS had transformed from a handful of desert raiders into a symbol of elite warfare. Their influence reshaped how modern armies approached special operations. The United States, Soviet Union, and many other nations would later develop their own special forces inspired by Stirling's model. Even today, the SAS legacy remains unmatched. Every modern commando, from Navy SEALs to Delta Force, traces part of its origin to those desert warriors of 1941, men who dared to do the impossible. The SAS didn't just win battles, they changed the art of war itself. They proved one simple truth: in war, it's not the size of the army that matters, but the will to act when others hesitate. U.S. Army Rangers, the spearhead of American assaults, from D-Day to Point du Hoc. The U.S. Army Rangers were America's answer to the need for elite, lightning-fast strike forces capable of taking on the toughest missions of World War II. Born from inspiration taken directly from the British commandos, the Rangers became a symbol of courage, adaptability, and pure combat determination. Their motto, "Rangers Lead the Way," wasn't just a slogan. It was a battle cry that echoed from the beaches of Normandy to the rugged mountains of Italy. The story of the Rangers began in 1942, when U.S. Major William Orlando Darby was tasked with forming an elite unit trained in commando-style warfare. Drawing on the British SAS and commando models, Darby handpicked men who were physically strong, mentally sharp, and fiercely loyal. These early Rangers trained under brutal conditions in Scotland, mastering small unit tactics, amphibious landings, hand-to-hand combat, and night raids. They became a band of brothers forged by discipline and daring. Their first test came in North Africa, during the Allied invasion in 1942. Fighting alongside the British, the Rangers carried out raids against Axis positions in Tunisia, quickly earning a reputation for their efficiency and fearlessness. But it was in Italy, at places like Cisterna and Anzio, where the Rangers proved their mettle in some of the war's bloodiest and most chaotic battles. However, their defining moment, the one that immortalized their name, came on June 6, 1944, during the D-Day landings in Normandy. As the Allied Armada approached the French coast, the Rangers were given one of the most dangerous and critical missions of the entire operation: to capture and neutralize the German gun batteries atop Point du Hoc, massive artillery pieces that threatened to annihilate the landing troops on Omaha and Utah beaches. The cliffs of Point du Hoc rose 100 feet straight from the sea, fortified with machine guns and bunkers. Yet, as the landing craft approached under heavy enemy fire, the Rangers pressed forward. Scaling the cliffs with ropes, ladders, and sheer determination, they fought their way to the top, battling Germans in brutal close-quarters combat. When they reached the summit, they discovered that the massive guns had been moved inland. Undeterred, small teams split off, tracked down the hidden artillery, and destroyed them using grenades and thermite charges. Their success saved countless Allied lives and ensured the beaches below could be secured. Of the 225 men who landed at Point du Hoc, only about 90 were still able to fight by the end of the day, but they held their ground until reinforcements arrived. That stand became a symbol of what the Rangers represented: unyielding courage, no matter the cost. Beyond Normandy, Rangers continued to lead the charge across Europe. They stormed enemy positions in Hurtgen Forest, liberated towns, and led assaults across rivers and fortifications. Their missions were always dangerous, often behind enemy lines, and always vital to the success of larger operations. What set the Rangers apart wasn't just their combat skill, it was their mentality. They were trained to think independently, adapt under pressure, and fight as if their lives, and the lives of others, depended on every decision. In many ways, they embodied the new American way of war: fast, flexible, and relentless. By the end of World War II, the Rangers had etched their name into history as the tip of the Allied spear. Their legacy lived on, shaping future American Special Operations Forces, including the modern U.S. Army Rangers, Delta Force, and Special Forces units. The cliffs of Point du Hoc still stand today, scarred by shells and time, but they serve as a living monument to what the Rangers achieved. When General Norman Cota shouted, "Rangers, lead the way!" on D-Day, it wasn't just an order, it became the eternal identity of these warriors. The Rangers didn't just lead the way in battle. They defined what it meant to fight with honor, skill, and unbreakable resolve. German Waffen-SS, fanatical elite units known for both combat prowess and brutality. Among the most feared and controversial forces of World War II were the Waffen-SS, the armed wing of Adolf Hitler's Schutzstaffel, a force that combined unmatched battlefield discipline with ruthless ideological fanaticism. What began as Hitler's personal guard evolved into a sprawling military organization of over 900,000 men by the war's end. Men who fought with extraordinary skill, loyalty, and often terrifying brutality. Formed in the 1930s as an elite protection unit loyal only to the Führer, the Waffen-SS grew rapidly once the war began. These were not ordinary soldiers. They were indoctrinated from the start to see themselves as racially superior warriors, defenders of Nazi ideology as much as the German state. Recruits underwent extreme physical training and political conditioning, designed to harden them mentally and physically for total war. When World War II erupted in 1939, the Waffen-SS first saw combat during the invasion of Poland, where they quickly gained a reputation for both aggressive tactics and ruthless methods. In France, 1940, they spearheaded assaults that shattered Allied defenses, often advancing where regular army units faltered. By the time of the Eastern Front campaign, the Waffen-SS had grown into a powerful and distinct part of the German war machine, answering directly to Himmler and Hitler rather than the Wehrmacht High Command. Their elite divisions, such as the Leibstandard SS Adolf Hitler, Das Reich, Totenkopf and Viking, became synonymous with shock action. On the battlefield, their effectiveness was undeniable. They were often placed in the toughest sectors, counterattacking against overwhelming odds and holding ground that others could not. Their armored formations fought in nearly every major campaign, from Kursk to Kharkov, from Normandy to the Battle of the Bulge. The Waffen-SS excelled in combined arms warfare. Their tank divisions, equipped with Tigers and Panthers, became legendary for both their firepower and their mobility. They were among the first to master rapid armored maneuvers, blitzkrieg, with a ferocity that shocked their enemies. Even Allied commanders acknowledged their fighting ability. Many British and American officers described them as among the best trained soldiers they ever faced. Yet this combat brilliance came at a moral cost. The same ideological zeal that made them fearless also made them merciless. On the Eastern Front, SS divisions committed some of the worst atrocities of the war: mass executions, village burnings, and the murder of civilians and prisoners. Units like Totenkopf and Das Reich left behind trails of destruction that still stain their names. One of the most infamous examples came in June 1944, during the Battle of Normandy. Members of the 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich massacred 642 civilians in the French village of Oradour-sur-Glane, men, women, and children, in retaliation for resistance attacks. Similar horrors unfolded across Eastern Europe, where the Waffen-SS viewed their enemies, particularly Soviet soldiers and partisans, as subhuman. Despite these crimes, their battlefield achievements cannot be ignored. The Waffen-SS fought tenaciously at Kursk, mounting counterattacks even after massive Soviet breakthroughs. At Kharkov in 1943, the SS Panzer Corps under Paul Hauser retook the city in one of Germany's last great tactical victories on the Eastern Front. During the Ardennes Offensive, Battle of the Bulge, SS divisions such as Leibstandard and Hitlerjugend formed the backbone of Hitler's final gamble in the West, displaying extraordinary resilience even as the war turned hopelessly against them. By 1945, the Waffen-SS had expanded to include not just Germans, but also tens of thousands of volunteers from across Europe, from Scandinavia, the Balkans, and even occupied France. These foreign SS divisions fought under the same black insignia, drawn by anti-communism, nationalism, or ideological devotion. The elite image persisted even as the military situation collapsed. When the Third Reich finally fell, the Waffen-SS was both revered and reviled. Many veterans insisted they were merely soldiers like any others, brave men fighting for their country. But the Nuremberg Tribunal saw things differently, declaring the Waffen-SS a criminal organization responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity. In military terms, the Waffen-SS left a complex legacy. They set new standards for small unit tactics, coordination, and battlefield discipline. Their armored formations were models of efficiency and aggression. But their fanaticism, their blind loyalty to Hitler, and their participation in atrocities ensure they remain one of the darkest symbols of Nazi Germany's militarism. They were warriors without mercy, brilliant in combat, monstrous in ideology. The Waffen-SS will forever stand as both a testament to human capability in war, and a warning of what happens when loyalty and skill serve evil instead of honor. Soviet Spetsnaz, Red Army's shadow warriors, experts in sabotage and reconnaissance. In the chaos of the Eastern Front, a front so vast it stretched from the Arctic to the Black Sea, the Soviet Union unleashed a weapon of its own that did not rely on tanks or artillery, but on stealth, deception, and nerve. These were the Spetsnaz, the Red Army's shadow warriors, elite soldiers trained to operate where regular armies could not, behind enemy lines. The term Spetsnaz is short for Wojska Specjalnego Nazначenia, Special Purpose Forces. While their modern fame came during the Cold War, the origins of these units trace back to World War II, when the Soviet Union recognized the need for specialized troops capable of conducting reconnaissance, sabotage, and deep infiltration. Unlike conventional divisions, these men worked in secrecy, often detached from the main army, gathering intelligence and wreaking havoc on German logistics. By 1941, as Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the Red Army was caught off guard. Massive encirclements left entire Soviet armies destroyed. The Soviets quickly learned that brute force alone could not match the speed and precision of the Wehrmacht's blitzkrieg. They needed unconventional fighters, small, mobile, and deadly, who could strike silently in the enemy's rear. Thus began the rise of the Spetsnaz concept, small, highly trained detachments, composed of some of the most skilled, disciplined, and fearless men the Soviet Union could find. Many of these early units were attached to the NKVD, the Soviet secret police, or to regular army fronts. Their missions were dangerous and often suicidal: to blow up bridges, derail trains, cut communication lines, assassinate officers, and sabotage German supply routes hundreds of miles behind the front. Operating in the forests and villages of occupied territories, these commandos relied on stealth, deception, and local resistance movements. They dressed like farmers, spoke local dialects, and blended into the landscape. Their survival depended on cunning and adaptability. A single squad could tie down entire German battalions by disrupting supply convoys or destroying ammunition depots. The Spetsnaz were also masters of intelligence gathering. Using covert observation posts and intercepted radio signals, they reported on German troop movements, artillery positions, and tank deployments, information that often proved vital for major Soviet counteroffensives. Their reconnaissance missions before the Battle of Stalingrad and Kursk helped the Red Army anticipate enemy strategies, giving them the upper hand in two of the most decisive battles of the war. Perhaps their most dangerous missions involved coordinating with partisan groups, local guerrillas who resisted the Nazi occupation. Deep behind enemy lines, Spetsnaz operatives trained these partisans in sabotage, demolitions, and ambush tactics. They provided intelligence and organized attacks on railways and supply columns. Together, they waged a shadow war across the occupied Soviet Union, turning the vast forests and swamps into death traps for German troops. Their courage came at a terrible price. Casualty rates among Spetsnaz units were among the highest in the Red Army. Many operated with no expectation of rescue or extraction. If captured, they faced brutal interrogation and certain execution. The Germans treated them not as soldiers, but as terrorists. Yet, they continued their missions, guided by fierce patriotism and the belief that every destroyed German supply train or fuel dump shortened the war. Training for these operatives was grueling and relentless. Recruits underwent harsh physical conditioning, survival exercises, and weapons training. They were taught unarmed combat, explosives handling, stealth movement, and psychological warfare. They had to endure hunger, exhaustion, and the freezing Russian winters, because on the battlefield, they would have no comfort, no reinforcements, and no mercy. The effectiveness of Soviet special operations became increasingly clear as the war progressed. By 1944, as the Red Army began to push westward, Spetsnaz units played a critical role in softening German defenses ahead of large offensives. They would infiltrate the enemy's rear, destroy bridges and fuel depots, and disrupt retreat routes. During the Belarusian offensive, Operation Bagration, in 1944, one of the most successful Soviet campaigns of the war, Spetsnaz and partisans isolated entire German armies by cutting railways and communication lines, making the massive encirclement possible. Their influence extended beyond the front lines. Many of their tactics, ambushes, infiltration, psychological deception, laid the groundwork for modern special operations doctrine. After the war, the Soviet Union officially institutionalized these units, creating permanent Spetsnaz formations under the GRU military intelligence. The legend of these wartime ghost soldiers became the foundation of Soviet special forces for decades to come. Although they never received the same publicity as the British SAS or American Rangers, the Spetsnaz of World War II were no less formidable. They embodied the Soviet Union's ability to adapt, innovate, and strike from the shadows. In the blood-soaked forests of Eastern Europe, they proved that victory was not only won by massive armies, but also by the unseen men who struck where the enemy least expected. Their war was silent, ruthless, and often unrecorded, but their impact was undeniable. They were the invisible edge of the Red Army, the eyes, the blade, and the vengeance of a nation fighting for survival. Japanese SNLF, the Empire's deadly marine commandos. The Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces, SNLF, were Japan's elite naval infantry during World War II, often described as the Marine Commandos of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Formed in the 1930s, these troops were trained to perform amphibious assaults, capture key coastal targets, and defend strategically vital islands. While they were similar in role to the U.S. Marines, the SNLF had their own distinct doctrine, rooted in Japan's warrior traditions, naval precision, and an unbreakable code of honor. They were not merely soldiers, they were naval warriors trained for some of the harshest conditions in modern warfare. The origins of the SNLF can be traced back to Japan's growing need for specialized forces capable of seizing and holding foreign ports during its imperial expansion. With the Japanese Navy's influence spreading across East Asia and the Pacific, it became clear that conventional infantry could not meet the demands of fast, coordinated amphibious operations. Thus, the Special Naval Landing Forces were born, recruited from naval personnel, rigorously trained in amphibious tactics, hand-to-hand combat, demolitions, and urban warfare. Training was brutally intense. SNLF soldiers were pushed to their physical and psychological limits, often undergoing live-fire exercises, endurance marches, and bayonet drills that emphasized aggression and fearlessness. They were indoctrinated with Bushido, the traditional samurai code that demanded absolute loyalty, honor, and self-sacrifice. Surrender was considered shameful. Dying in battle for the emperor was the highest honor. This mindset created warriors who fought with fanatical determination and were often impossible to break. In combat, the SNLF gained an early reputation for being swift, efficient, and ruthless. During the initial stages of World War II, when Japan expanded across the Pacific and Southeast Asia, SNLF units led many of the invasions. They spearheaded the attacks on Hong Kong, the Philippines, Borneo, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies, capturing strategic ports and airfields with precision and speed. Their coordination with the Imperial Japanese Navy allowed them to execute amphibious landings with remarkable synchronization, often catching defenders off guard. One of the first major showcases of the SNLF's prowess came during the Battle of Hong Kong in December 1941. Japanese naval infantry launched aggressive assaults on the British garrison, demonstrating superior training and coordination. Their ability to move through urban terrain and strike with surgical precision marked them as a formidable force. Similar performances were seen in the invasions of Wake Island and Guam, where SNLF troops displayed both bravery and brutality. However, as the war dragged on, the SNLF began to face a new challenge: the Allied counteroffensives. The tide of war shifted after 1942, and the SNLF, once the attacker, was forced into defensive roles across the Pacific Islands. Battles like Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Attu tested their endurance to the extreme. Unlike typical soldiers, the SNLF refused to retreat or surrender. Instead, they dug into caves, bunkers, and jungles, turning every island into a fortress. Their defense tactics were as terrifying as they were effective: snipers hidden in trees, tunnels connecting strongpoints, and night infiltration attacks that left Allied troops constantly on edge. The Battle of Guadalcanal, 1942–43, was one of the defining moments for the SNLF. Initially deployed to seize control of the island's vital airfield, they found themselves trapped in a grinding battle of attrition against relentless American Marines. Despite starvation, disease, and overwhelming firepower, the SNLF fought with astonishing tenacity. In the end, most of them perished rather than surrender. Similar scenes played out on Tarawa in 1943, where the Japanese garrison of about 4,500 men, mostly SNLF troops, faced 18,000 U.S. Marines. After 3 days of brutal fighting, only a handful of Japanese survived. What made the SNLF particularly feared was not just their combat skill, but their mindset. They viewed death as victory if it meant fulfilling their duty. They executed banzai charges, suicidal frontal assaults meant to shock the enemy and uphold personal honor. To the Allies, these attacks seemed irrational, but to the Japanese, they were a symbol of undying loyalty to the Emperor and the Navy. Despite their fearsome reputation, the SNLF had limitations. They were relatively small compared to the U.S. Marine Corps, and Japan's strained logistics meant they often lacked proper supplies and reinforcements. As the war turned against Japan, SNLF units were isolated on remote islands with dwindling ammunition and food. The shift from offensive raids to desperate last stands symbolized the changing fate of the Japanese Empire itself. By 1945, the once proud SNLF had been decimated. The few remaining units fought to the end on islands like Okinawa and the Philippines, where they continued to resist even after Japan's defeat seemed inevitable. When the war finally ended, the SNLF ceased to exist, but their legacy endured. They were remembered for their unmatched discipline, courage, and ferocity, as well as the darker aspects of their service: war crimes and civilian massacres committed during Japan's expansion. In hindsight, the Japanese Special Naval Landing Forces represented the dual nature of Japan's wartime spirit: bravery and brutality intertwined. They were elite warriors molded by a philosophy that rejected surrender and glorified sacrifice. Whether storming a beach or defending an island to the last man, the SNLF embodied the relentless resolve of Japan's military during World War II, a symbol of both its strength and its tragic downfall. Fallschirmjäger, German paratroopers, fearless airborne troops who struck from the skies. The Fallschirmjäger, Germany's elite paratroopers, were among the most daring and highly trained soldiers of World War II, fearless warriors who quite literally struck from the skies. They were part of the Luftwaffe, German Air Force, not the Army, and were initially formed under the visionary leadership of General Kurt Student in the late 1930s. Their creation reflected Hitler's fascination with surprise warfare blitzkrieg, and the use of rapid airborne assaults to shock and paralyze enemy defenses before traditional ground forces even arrived. The Fallschirmjäger were not ordinary soldiers. They were hand-picked, intensively trained commandos, molded for high-risk missions behind enemy lines. Their training emphasized physical endurance, mental toughness, and absolute discipline. Every paratrooper was expected to think independently, act swiftly, and operate under extreme pressure. Their regimen included live-fire drills, close-quarters combat, glider operations, demolitions, and survival training in hostile terrain. The psychological conditioning was equally intense. Each Fallschirmjäger was taught that hesitation meant death, and that courage and surprise were their greatest weapons. Their first major test came during the invasion of Norway and Denmark in April 1940, where they performed small but daring air assaults to capture key airfields and fortifications. However, it was during the Battle of Fort Ebenemael in Belgium that the Fallschirmjäger truly etched their name into military history. In a stunning operation, just 85 paratroopers landed silently on the heavily fortified Belgian fortress using gliders, aircraft with no engines, then used explosive charges to disable the fortress's massive guns within hours. The fort, considered impregnable, fell in less than a day. This incredible feat demonstrated the sheer effectiveness of airborne surprise and established the Fallschirmjäger as one of the most innovative forces of the war. Their legend continued to grow with the invasion of the Netherlands and France, where they seized bridges, airfields, and strategic positions with lightning speed. The world took notice. Paratroopers were now the future of modern warfare. But their most ambitious and deadly operation came in May 1941, the Battle of Crete. Here, the Fallschirmjäger launched the first-ever large-scale airborne invasion in history. Over 10,000 paratroopers descended from the skies onto the Greek island, facing fierce Allied resistance from British, New Zealand, and Greek forces. The skies over Crete turned into chaos. Many German paratroopers were shot before even touching the ground, and initial losses were catastrophic. Yet, despite the devastating casualties, the Fallschirmjäger fought with relentless determination. Once on the ground, they regrouped, outflanked the defenders, and captured key airfields, allowing reinforcements to pour in. After 10 days of brutal fighting, the island of Crete fell to Germany. It was a tactical victory but a strategic loss. Over 4,000 Fallschirmjäger were killed, and thousands more wounded. Hitler, shocked by the high death toll, declared that never again would Germany undertake such a massive airborne operation. From that point onward, the Fallschirmjäger were primarily used as elite ground troops rather than paratroopers. Even without large-scale jumps, their combat record on the ground was extraordinary. They fought in North Africa, defending key positions alongside Rommel's Afrika Korps. In Italy, they became legendary for their defense of Monte Cassino in 1944, where they held off overwhelming Allied attacks for months, earning the nickname the Green Devils for their resilience and skill. Allied soldiers learned to respect and fear the Fallschirmjäger for their discipline, marksmanship, and refusal to surrender. Their role evolved as the war turned against Germany. By 1944-45, the Fallschirmjäger were often the backbone of German defenses on both the Western and Eastern fronts. They were deployed in desperate battles in Normandy, the Ardennes, Battle of the Bulge, and Italy, fighting tenaciously even when surrounded and outnumbered. Despite dwindling supplies, low morale across the German ranks, and the collapse of the Luftwaffe, the Fallschirmjäger continued to fight with a professionalism that astonished their enemies. What set the Fallschirmjäger apart was not only their training, but also their code of conduct. Unlike some other German formations, they prided themselves on treating prisoners humanely and maintaining discipline even in defeat. Their motto, Mut, true, Kameradschaft, courage, loyalty, comradeship, perfectly reflected their spirit. They were soldiers who believed in honor and skill over fanaticism, something that earned them respect from both allies and foes alike. However, Their loyalty to Hitler and the Nazi regime ultimately led them into battles that no amount of courage could win. In the final stages of the war, many Fallschirmjäger units were decimated while defending German cities and airfields. They fought to the bitter end in Berlin, the Ruhr pocket, and northern Italy, often refusing to retreat until completely overrun. By the end of World War II, the Fallschirmjäger had earned a fearsome reputation as some of the most elite and fearless troops of the entire conflict. Their daring airborne assaults changed the way modern militaries viewed paratrooper warfare forever. From the glider landings at Eben-Emael to the desperate stand at Monte Cassino, the Fallschirmjäger proved that courage, surprise, and discipline could achieve the impossible, even against overwhelming odds. The story of the Fallschirmjäger is one of brilliance and tragedy. They embodied innovation, fearlessness, and tactical genius, but they also fought for a cause that led to immense suffering. Today, military historians still study their operations to understand how a small, highly motivated force could reshape the dynamics of war. The Fallschirmjäger remain a testament to the power of skill and spirit, warriors who fell from the skies and fought with unmatched determination, forever leaving their mark on the battlefields of World War II. British Commandos, the original raiders who inspired modern special forces. During the dark days of 1940, after the fall of France, Britain faced the grim prospect of standing alone against the seemingly unstoppable forces of Nazi Germany. Conventional warfare alone could not strike at the heart of the enemy, nor could it lift the morale of a nation under siege. Out of this need, the British Commandos were born, elite raiding units conceived to strike quickly, disappear into the night, and disrupt German operations along occupied Europe's coasts. These men were the blueprint for what would later become modern special forces worldwide. The Commandos were envisioned by Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who famously declared that Britain should develop specially trained troops of the hunter class to attack, sabotage, and harass the enemy. Their mission was daring: to inflict damage on the German military infrastructure, capture prisoners, and gather intelligence, all while minimizing exposure to large-scale engagements. The idea was revolutionary at the time. Unlike traditional infantry, commandos operated in small units, relied on speed, stealth, and surprise, and were expected to function independently for extended periods behind enemy lines. Recruitment for the commandos was rigorous. Volunteers were drawn from all branches of the British military, including the Royal Navy, Army, and even the Royal Air Force. Candidates underwent grueling physical training, long marches with heavy packs, amphibious assaults, hand-to-hand combat, and weapons drills. They were taught demolition techniques, survival skills, and tactics for operating in enemy territory with minimal support. Only the most disciplined and determined soldiers were accepted, and the casualty rates during training were notoriously high. From 1940 onward, British commandos began conducting operations across the European theater. Early raids targeted German-occupied ports, airfields, and coastal installations in Norway, France, and the Low Countries. One of the most famous operations was Operation Archery in Norway, 1941, where commandos attacked the port of Vagsøy, destroying military installations, sinking German shipping, and capturing prisoners. These missions, though small in scale, had enormous psychological impact. They forced the Germans to divert troops to defend the coasts, disrupted supply lines, and proved that Britain could strike the enemy even under occupation. Commandos operated in a highly unconventional manner. They used fast boats, landing craft, and even submarines to reach their targets, often at night or under cover of fog. Once ashore, they moved swiftly in small groups, avoiding direct confrontations with superior enemy forces. Their training in close-quarters combat allowed them to neutralize guards silently, while their expertise in explosives enabled them to sabotage railways, fuel depots, and artillery positions. Speed, precision, and surprise were their greatest weapons. Perhaps the most notable aspect of the British commandos was their adaptability. They were organized into small, flexible units, often tailored to the mission at hand. Some specialized in raids along beaches and ports, others in reconnaissance, and some in long-range patrols deep behind enemy lines. They were instrumental in gathering intelligence prior to large-scale operations, such as the planning for D-Day, where detailed reconnaissance of Normandy's beaches by commandos helped shape the success of the Allied landings. The courage of the commandos was legendary. They faced heavily fortified positions, rough seas, and overwhelming odds, yet their resolve never faltered. Many missions resulted in high casualties, but their bravery inspired both British troops and occupied populations. They demonstrated that morale, training, and ingenuity could compensate for numerical inferiority. The influence of the British commandos extended far beyond World War II. Their tactics, structure, and ethos became the foundation for modern special forces around the world. Units such as the SAS Special Air Service, the U.S. Navy SEALs, and numerous NATO Special Operations Forces trace their doctrinal roots directly to the lessons learned by these daring raiders. The emphasis on speed, surprise, adaptability, and operating in small autonomous teams remains a hallmark of elite military operations today. By the end of the war, British commandos had carried out hundreds of raids, participated in major campaigns in Europe, North Africa, and the Mediterranean, and cemented a reputation for courage, precision, and effectiveness. They were not the largest force in the British military, but they were arguably among the most impactful in terms of tactical innovation and strategic effect. In essence, the British commandos were more than soldiers. They were pioneers of a new way of waging war. Their daring operations challenged conventional military doctrine, struck fear into German occupiers, and inspired generations of elite troops worldwide. They proved that with skill, determination, and audacity, a small force could make a monumental impact. The legacy of the British commandos endures as a testament to the power of elite, well-trained, and fearless soldiers operating at the cutting edge of warfare. U.S. Marine Raiders, America's first elite amphibious assault troops in the Pacific. During the early years of World War II, as the United States prepared to face the formidable Imperial Japanese forces in the Pacific, it became clear that conventional infantry tactics would not be enough to secure victory across thousands of islands. The U.S. Marine Corps responded with innovation and boldness, creating the Marine Raiders, America's first elite amphibious assault troops specifically trained for raiding, reconnaissance, and special operations. These units were designed to strike fast, hit hard, and disappear before the enemy could mount an effective response, embodying the kind of elite force that would set the standard for future special operations. The Marine Raiders were officially formed in 1942 under the leadership of Major General Holland M. Howland Smith, who envisioned a unit capable of conducting high-risk, high-impact operations on Japanese-held islands. The idea was revolutionary. Instead of conventional frontal assaults, these troops would use surprise, speed, and specialized skills to disrupt enemy defenses, gather intelligence, and pave the way for larger marine landings. Recruitment was selective, emphasizing physical fitness, mental toughness, and combat experience. Volunteers underwent rigorous training that pushed them to their limits, instilling resilience, creativity, and a willingness to take initiative in chaotic environments. Training for the Marine Raiders was both extensive and intense. They mastered amphibious landings, jungle warfare, demolition, marksmanship, hand-to-hand combat, and survival skills. Unlike standard infantry, they trained to operate in small autonomous teams, capable of carrying out precise strikes deep behind enemy lines. The goal was not simply to engage the enemy, but to attack, sabotage, and disappear, leaving confusion and destruction in their wake. This required discipline, coordination, and courage beyond what ordinary troops were expected to demonstrate. The Marine Raiders quickly proved their effectiveness in the Pacific theater. One of their earliest missions was the raid on Makin Atoll in the Gilbert Islands in August 1942. The raid was a daring operation. Hundreds of raiders landed on the beaches under darkness, destroyed Japanese installations, killed enemy soldiers, and gathered intelligence before evacuating with minimal losses. While small in scale, the raid had a significant psychological effect, showing both the Japanese and American high command that small specialized units could achieve results that conventional forces could not. Another notable operation was the Guadalcanal campaign, where Marine raiders participated in numerous engagements, including the Battle of Tulagi and various reconnaissance and raiding missions. Their ability to infiltrate enemy positions, secure vital intelligence, and disrupt Japanese supply lines was crucial in the early stages of the Solomon Islands campaign. These actions not only weakened Japanese positions, but also gave American forces a strategic advantage in the Pacific. The Marine raiders' success was due in large part to their adaptability. Operating in dense jungles, rocky beaches, and unfamiliar terrain, they relied on initiative and training to overcome challenges that conventional forces might have struggled with. Their missions often required covert movements, night attacks, and rapid withdrawal, all while under fire or facing hostile environments. These qualities made them feared opponents, particularly among Japanese garrisons unprepared for such unorthodox tactics. Despite their achievements, the Marine raiders faced challenges. Their small numbers and elite nature meant that they could not hold large areas or replace conventional units. As the Pacific War progressed, the U.S. Marine Corps gradually integrated raider tactics into larger amphibious operations, and many raider units were absorbed into standard Marine divisions by 1944. However, their impact on the early years of the war was undeniable. They pioneered techniques and strategies that would influence U.S. Special Operations Forces for decades to come. The legacy of the Marine Raiders extends far beyond their battlefield achievements. They were the forerunners of modern U.S. Special Operations Forces, inspiring units such as the Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Marine Special Operations Command. Their emphasis on speed, surprise, specialized skills, and small unit effectiveness became core principles of elite military operations worldwide. By the end of World War II, the U.S. Marine Raiders had left an indelible mark on the Pacific Campaign. They had executed bold raids, gathered vital intelligence, and demonstrated that courage, innovation, and specialized training could achieve strategic results disproportionate to their size. The Marine Raiders exemplified the best qualities of American military ingenuity: fearless, disciplined, and always ready to strike where the enemy least expected. In the annals of World War II, the U.S. Marine Raiders stand as a testament to the power of elite troops, small in number but mighty in impact, shaping the course of the Pacific War and setting a standard for generations of special operations forces that followed. Finnish ski troops, silent hunters who humiliated the Red Army in the Winter War. In the frozen forests and snow-covered landscapes of Finland, during the bitter winter of 1939 to 1940, a small, determined nation faced the massive might of the Soviet Union. The Finnish ski troops, elite soldiers trained to move swiftly and silently across snow and ice, became the symbol of Finnish resilience, ingenuity, and tactical brilliance during what would be remembered as the Winter War. Though heavily outnumbered and outgunned, these soldiers struck fear into the Red Army, proving that terrain mastery, speed, and clever tactics could outweigh sheer numerical superiority. The Winter War began on November 30, 1939, when the Soviet Union invaded Finland with over 400,000 troops, seeking to secure territory and buffer zones near Leningrad. The Finns, in contrast, had a standing army of around 300,000, of which only a fraction were trained for winter combat. Among them, the ski troops were uniquely prepared for the extreme conditions. These men were expert skiers, trained to navigate deep snow, frozen forests, and frozen lakes, often carrying minimal equipment but maximizing mobility. Their primary advantage was speed. They could move across terrain that was nearly impassable to mechanized Soviet units, enabling them to strike suddenly and disappear before the enemy could mount a counterattack. Ski troops operated in small, highly mobile units, often of 10 to 20 men, which allowed them to execute precise ambushes. They were equipped with rifles, light machine guns, and explosives, and trained to set traps along known Soviet routes. Using camouflage and knowledge of the terrain, they could vanish into the forests after a strike, leaving the heavily armored Soviet formations bewildered and vulnerable. This guerrilla-style warfare became the hallmark of Finnish resistance, turning the landscape itself into a weapon. One of the most famous tactics employed by the ski troops was the Matti system, in which Soviet columns were isolated and encircled in small pockets, then destroyed piecemeal. The ski troops used mobility to cut off communications and supply lines, preventing large Soviet forces from regrouping. They attacked under cover of darkness or snowstorms, and their silent movements made them nearly impossible to detect. Often, they would appear unexpectedly behind enemy lines, attack a poorly defended position, and retreat before reinforcements could arrive. The impact of the ski troops was enormous. Despite the Soviet Union's overwhelming numbers, Finland inflicted staggering losses on the Red Army. Soviet troops were often ill-prepared for winter conditions, with inadequate clothing, poor morale, and a lack of training for forest warfare. In contrast, the Finns thrived in the cold, using skis to move faster than vehicles, skis as improvised weapons, and the forests as natural cover. Entire Soviet regiments were ambushed and annihilated by small bands of Finnish soldiers, creating a psychological advantage that the Red Army struggled to overcome. The ski troops were not only effective tactically, but also strategically significant. Their ability to slow the Soviet advance, inflict high casualties, and protect key locations bought Finland crucial time to fortify positions and negotiate internationally. Although Finland ultimately ceded some territory under the Moscow Peace Treaty of March 1940, the Winter War became a legendary example of how skill, courage, and adaptation could allow a smaller, determined force to challenge a vastly superior enemy. The legacy of the Finnish ski troops extends far beyond the Winter War. Their success influenced modern mountain and cold weather warfare, demonstrating the value of mobility, terrain mastery, and unconventional tactics. Many military historians regard their operations as a textbook example of asymmetric warfare, showing that small units trained for environmental advantages can have an outsized impact against larger forces. In addition to their tactical brilliance, the ski troops embodied Finnish national spirit, determination, resilience, and the will to defend their homeland against overwhelming odds. Their silent, deadly strikes through the snow-covered forests humiliated a superpower and became a source of national pride, inspiring generations of soldiers in Finland and beyond. The Finnish ski troops are remembered not just as soldiers, but as masters of winter warfare, warriors who turned the frozen wilderness into both shield and sword. They transformed the Winter War from a battle of attrition into a showcase of ingenuity, courage, and the power of specialized elite troops, proving that even a small nation can challenge giants when it leverages skill, speed, and the environment to its advantage. Polish Home Army, Armia Krajowa, underground fighters who defied Nazi occupation. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, the country's formal military forces were quickly overwhelmed by the Blitzkrieg, leaving the nation under brutal occupation. But Poland refused to surrender. From the shadows of towns, villages, and forests, a remarkable resistance movement emerged. The Polish Home Army, known in Polish as Armia Krajowa, AK. Numbering hundreds of thousands at its peak, these underground fighters waged one of the most organized and effective resistance campaigns of World War II, striking fear into the heart of the Nazi occupiers and sustaining the spirit of a nation under siege. The Home Army was formally established in 1942, consolidating various regional resistance groups under the authority of the Polish government in exile in London. Its members came from every walk of life: former soldiers, intellectuals, farmers, students, and even women, united by a single purpose: to fight for Poland's freedom. The AK operated as a clandestine army, maintaining a strict chain of command, training units in sabotage, intelligence gathering, and guerrilla warfare, all while hiding from the Gestapo and Nazi security forces. The Home Army's operations were incredibly diverse. They ranged from sabotage and espionage to full-scale uprisings. Railways, bridges, and communication lines were common targets, disrupting German supply chains and slowing the movement of troops and equipment. The AK also gathered intelligence on German troop movements, weapons production, and fortifications, often transmitting this information to the Allies, proving invaluable in planning operations on the eastern and western fronts. In urban centers, clandestine newspapers and leaflets kept the Polish populace informed and defiant, reinforcing morale despite severe repression. One of the most famous operations of the Home Army was Operation Tempest, culminating in the Warsaw Uprising of 1944. Thousands of AK fighters attempted to liberate Warsaw ahead of the advancing Soviet forces, aiming to reassert Polish sovereignty before the Red Army arrived. For 63 days, despite being vastly outgunned, the insurgents held sections of the city, engaging in intense street-to-street combat against well-equipped German troops. Civilians supported them with food, shelter, and intelligence, turning Warsaw into a symbol of resistance. Though the uprising was ultimately crushed and the city left in ruins, the bravery and determination of the Home Army inspired both occupied Poland and the wider Allied world. The Home Army also specialized in targeted assassinations and guerrilla raids. Units known as Kedy carried out daring attacks against German officers, collaborators, and critical infrastructure. These operations were designed to destabilize the occupation and demonstrate that the Nazis could never fully control Poland. The AK's expertise in urban and forest guerrilla warfare allowed them to strike swiftly and vanish before retaliation, leveraging intimate knowledge of the terrain and local support. Despite facing overwhelming odds, the Polish Home Army's impact was enormous. By 1944, it had become one of the largest underground armies in Europe, numbering over 400,000 members. Their actions tied down significant German forces that might otherwise have been deployed elsewhere, disrupted occupation efforts, and kept alive the hope of national liberation. The AK's efforts also helped preserve the idea of a free Polish state, ensuring that even under occupation, Poland remained active on the military and political stage. The courage of the Home Army came at tremendous cost. Thousands of fighters were killed in combat or executed after capture, and civilians suffered heavily from German reprisals. Yet their sacrifices cemented their place as national heroes and a model of resistance in the annals of World War II. The legacy of the Polish Home Army extends far beyond the war itself. Their discipline, courage, and ingenuity in asymmetric warfare have been studied by militaries and historians worldwide. The AK demonstrated that even under brutal occupation, a well-organized underground force could inflict meaningful damage, maintain intelligence networks, and inspire a population to resist tyranny. In essence, the Polish Home Army exemplified the power of determination, planning, and national spirit. Operating in the shadows, they challenged one of the most ruthless regimes in history, leaving a legacy of heroism, resistance, and unwavering dedication to freedom. Their story is a testament to the idea that even when conventional armies are defeated, the spirit of a nation can fight on.